just doesn't make sense.
Precarious position in this country. We need a political change, but we also need to resolve to resist. Hey, thanks for watching our live stream. I'm the host, David Creighton. In the meantime, have a look at some of these clips and take the opportunity, please, to like this broadcast, ring the bell, or subscribe.
And we're stepping up in every way we can because we know that Russia must win this war. That Ukraine must win this war.
But freedom is something you earn every day.
I don't know that the government currently has fiscal anchors.
Your home is your castle. We're calling on the government to introduce and immediately pass the Stand on Guard law.
But we also need to resolve to resist. Thanks for joining me today on Stand on Guard. This is your host, David Creighton, broadcasting to you live from Ottawa. After the break, my guest, John Carpay of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. We're going to be talking about the government's latest assault on free speech in at least 2 censorship bills, possibly 3.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to...
Your home is your castle. We're calling on the government to introduce and immediately pass the Stand on Guard law.
But we also need to resolve to resist.
We'll do it live. Okay. No. We'll do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
I love that. That's Bill O'Reilly many, many years ago. Pre-factor days. But it's my pleasure to introduce. Well, I don't need to introduce John Carpay. He is well known on this station. He's a freedom fighter and probably the most prominent lawyer with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, which is always in the forefront of fighting for individual rights, constitutional freedoms, and your freedom. And it's John. I just got off the air with Katie Passivnay of the Universal Ostrich Farms, and there's another person who's being assaulted by the federal government. But there's so much going on right now in terms of attacks on personal freedom, individual rights. And this government, and this is really what I want to clarify at the beginning here, because I am utterly confused as to how many pieces of legislation this government is introducing. We have Bill C-8, which I'm reading here has had a first reading on June 18th, 2025, under the auspices of the Minister of Public Safety. We have Bill C-9, which, of course, was introduced almost a couple of weeks ago, on September 19th. That's an act to amend the criminal code, hate propaganda, hate crime, and access to religious or cultural places. But I just want to play a clip from Sean Fraser, the Attorney General, Justice Minister, where I think he really muddies the water, because there could be 3 anti-free speech bills, 3 censorship bills. Let's just listen to him at a news conference.
You're talking about all this legislation that you're proposing this fall. How soon? Do we have a date we can expect to see some of that?
We should expect to see in the very near future the legislation dealing with intimidation and obstruction of those participating in their faith community, as well as hate crimes more broadly. Next month, we anticipate we will...
Oh, what happened here?
The legislation touching on bail and sentencing. Subsequently, during this parliamentary setting, depending on how efficiently the process of the House works and the collaboration of other parties to advance this legislation to get it done, we expect to see that 3rd piece of legislation tabled later in this parliamentary sitting that would deal with intimate partner violence, protecting kids online, and victims in the criminal justice process.
Great, thank you. And just following up on your comment about some faith-based community, there have been calls from Jewish groups to create nationwide safety zones because of a rise in hate and more security protection. Is that something you're looking at doing?
So I've had the opportunity to engage with the Jewish community over the course of the last number of months, most recently actually here in Edmonton, hosting a roundtable with members of the Jewish community locally in advance of our caucus meetings here. We have to make sure that we can do what's within our bailiwick, and that we also encourage other levels of government to take measures to improve public safety that are within theirs. Specifically, when you're talking about specific safety zones, regulating the ability of people to be in a particular place is not something that falls to the federal government. However, criminalizing morally culpable behavior that may take place in proximity to those institutions or elsewhere is something that we do have the authority to move forward with. Specifically, what you should expect to see is when we're dealing with those facilities that are meant to serve an identifiable group. Think of a synagogue for the Jewish community, a mosque, a church, but also community centers, schools, or specific places that are designed specifically for a given community. We want to add criminal provisions that would prohibit the obstruction of those facilities and the intimidation of the people seeking to use them. In addition, we are looking to establish new measures that would address hate more broadly, that is coupled with other criminal behavior that may take place regardless of its proximity to a particular faith-based institution.
I just want to kind of unbundle this, because we've got at least two pieces of legislation, but he referred to two pieces of legislation in the fall. So we've got Bill C-8, as we said, which is the one that was introduced. And I didn't even remember this being introduced in the fall, or in the summer, June 18th, actually late spring, technically. And this is the one that is under the Telecommunications Act and under the auspices of the Minister of Public Safety. We also have Bill C-9, which we all know, that's the one about the cultural symbols. But before we unbundle these, and we get your expert opinion on why these are dangerous, do you anticipate there being like a third piece of legislation here that's possible to see?
Well, certainly we're seeing a lot of bills coming out all at once that are very rapidly pushing Canada towards becoming a police state, where the government has very tight control over what you see and hear and read, and what you do not see and hear and read. The combined effects are terrifying. You got Bill C-2, which they called the Strong Borders Act. It should be called the Strong Surveillance Act. There's some good parts of Bill C-2 that strengthen our borders, which is something Canadians want. Most Canadians do not accept the idea that foreigners, non-Canadians, are just entitled to cross our borders and move into Canada and start living here. It's as a sovereign nation, we control our own borders. So there's some positive aspects to Bill C-2, but there's a whole bunch of surveillance aspects to Bill C-2 that give more power to police. They give government officials powers over electronic service providers, which is just anybody. You and I, the Justice Centre and Creighton's Right, independent media, we are electronic service providers, right? So it's pretty much everybody. So you got Bill C-2, Authorized Access to Information Act, giving government officials all kinds of surveillance powers, the right to demand documents without a search warrant. Okay, so C-2 is terrifying. Then you get C-8, where in the name of national security, which of course is a legitimate goal that all Canadians can get behind, we want to protect ourselves from foreign terrorists, domestic terrorists. We want to have security. We want a government that fights crime. So the goal is legitimate, but this authorizes the Minister of Public Safety to demand that an internet provider cut off the internet of an individual. It can be used to silence you or me or anybody else. If you are, if the government really dislikes what you're saying, they can use that power to silence you and kick you off the internet. That's Bill C-8. That's really scary. Bill C-9 is the bill that attacks there you go. This is Liberal Bill C8 allows the government without trial or a warrant to issue an order banning internet providers from providing any service to any specified person, prohibiting the disclosure of the order's existence. So keep it secret. So all of a sudden, David Creighton's no longer on the internet, but nobody's allowed to know why. You can't get your
incredible. That's incredible. That is like Soviet Russia.
This is Soviet Russia, Nazi Germany type of legislation. It needs to be said. Yeah. And then C9 is undermines our freedom of expression in a number of ways. So I don't know which one you want to talk about first, David, but it's terrible. Like they're all coming all at once. And then you have the Online Harms Act, formerly Bill C63. They might bring that one back. That was a terrible piece of legislation. It died only because we had an election. The NDP was going to join the Liberals and vote it into law.
Yeah, well, that's but what I'm guessing here, and I think it's Sean Fraser's inability as a minister. He has failed at every ministry, and I don't want to get into an odd hominem attack on Sean Fraser. It's too easy a target, but I think he's over his head on this. There's so much happening, but I do believe we're not going to get just two pieces of anti-free speech. We're going to get a third, because clearly in that news conference, Sean Fraser alluded to another bill which sounded exactly like the Online Harms Act. So we've got this Cybersecurity Act under the Public Safety Minister, who is, of course, grossly incompetent. This is the same guy who said the gun law's unmanageable and never going to work, but is up there every day defending it. So I think we're going to get the cybersecurity bill, which you just pointed out, is going to make it basically anything you say, the government can tell you you're off the air, and you can't tell anybody why you're off the air. You have to keep your mouth shut. We've got this bill C9, which is all about hateful symbols. It really comes down to that for me, having read that. And I thought, my God, how are we about to define that? And we've got a third bill on the horizon sometime in the fall that is going to be another Online Harms Act. So I think if we thought it was bad under Justin Trudeau, where we had just the Online Harms Act, Bill C63, to deal with, the Carney government has made it threefold. We've got three pieces of Online Harms Act coming at us. And I think this is incredible for a government that is supposed to be tackling economic issues. They've got a growing deficit. They've got increasing trade problems. They've got ballooning government employee problems. This is a government that's completely out of control with spending, but they've got lots of time to talk about how they're going to abridge and erode and possibly completely abrogate our freedom of speech. So do you think it's possible? And I just want to start there. Then we can get into Bill C8 and C9. We know the Online Harms Act is going to be identical, but do you think it's possible if there's another one coming?
Well, the Online Harms Act, if they bring it back the same way as what it was first introduced in, I think it was 2024, early 2024.
It was. Yeah.
There's a provision in there where a judge could order you under house arrest and wearing an ankle bracelet, and without you being convicted of a crime. So there was a provision in there where if your neighbor thinks that you are about to commit a hate speech crime, the neighbor can go to court and potentially, I mean, the judge might turn down the request, but potentially you could have all these restrictions placed on you, including jail time if you violate the restrictions. I don't. It's so heinous to have sort of like a thought crime or a pre-crime punishment to take away your liberty and place you under house arrest because you might commit a crime in the future. That is so totalitarian. And if they bring back C63, it'll be a different number. But yeah, the Online Harms Act, C63, if they bring that back, I'll be looking to see if they still have that provision, because that's got to be one of the worst aspects of it. But the whole thing is terrible. And these laws duplicate what's already there. Child pornography is already illegal. It's already criminal to possess it, distribute it. Revenge porn, don't even want to describe what that is, but that's already illegal. Intimidating, bullying children can be, depending on the nature of it, can also be criminal already. And now with C9, you've got, we're going to protect access to houses of worship, which sounds like a great idea. It's already illegal to obstruct somebody. If there is a Jew wanting to go into a synagogue, or a Muslim wanting to go into the mosque, or a Christian wanting to go into a church, if you physically impede that person, or if you utter threats and threaten to harm them, that's already a crime. So a lot of this is duplicative. We don't need more laws in Canada. We don't. Better enforcement of some would be great, but we don't need more legislation.
No, you've said that, and that's of course how they sold it the last time. This was about protecting children. This was about protecting women from revenge porn, and the criminal code already has laws and statutes doing that.
Or protecting men from revenge porn. That could go both ways.
This government doesn't probably want to even acknowledge that exists, but of course, yeah, these laws exist. It was never about protecting anybody. It was about seizing control of freedom of speech, like this liberal government has always wanted to do. But you have said, and when I last heard you in person here in Ottawa, and you were talking about this bill, and you so correctly assessed it as being basically hate means whatever the government decides in the end. It constitutes hate, because what is hate? And when I looked at this new bill, Bill C9, and it's all about hateful symbols, and I said, good God, how are they going to enforce that? Because once again, the hate of a symbol is in the eye of a beholder. And okay, we can all agree that the swastika is a hateful symbol, but are we going to eradicate it from books, from the cover of books? Does that mean William L. Shirer's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich will no longer be on library shelves because it prominently has a swastika on the cover and the spine? I have 3 copies of it in my house here. And you think about the hundreds of millions of photographs taken of the Third Reich where swastika flags are prominent. Somebody might be offended by that book in the library, and therefore we have to remove it, or we have to start censoring all of this material so it's not offensive. And once again, for me, it comes down to, sorry if you're offended. This is part of history. It's there. This was a symbol that was used. Yeah, it was an evil regime, but if we pretend it never happened, we're going to get more evil regimes. This is why there are so many documentaries about Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. And if we start censoring everything, like YouTube does, for instance, with historical films now. I was watching a film recently on the Holocaust, and all of the incriminating evidence was blocked out of the video. So you can watch it and say, I'm sorry, I don't see what they did wrong, because the evidence is all gone. And that, to me, is where this is going. It's going to be censoring history. It's going to be censoring any symbol that somebody might find offensive. I think it's going to be legal chaos, because some people find the Jewish flag, the Israeli flag offensive. Some people would say, "Oh, that offends me." Some people are offended by the Palestinian flag. Some people are offended by this symbol, and I don't know where it's going to begin and end. And I think it's going to be unenforceable, but it could end up with an absolute disaster of a country. And I think that to me is where Bill C9 is taking us. What do you think?
Well, it does carve out an exception for, you could display the swastika for purposes of journalism, art, religion, and education. So there is an exception carved out. So, you know, the Mr. Schirer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, the book, you know, can still have a swastika on it, and you could probably carry that book down the street, and you know, that might be okay. But this bill is hugely problematic with, as you mentioned, David, the whole concept of hate. When we have a law, you know, hate speech means speech that they hate, and it's so subjective. And it's almost comical to see them grasping at straws trying to define hate. Bill C9 tries to clarify, and it says that, and I get this. This is from the bill. Feelings of disdain and dislike are okay. That's not hateful. But feelings of detestation and vilification are hateful. If you can mock, ridicule, humiliate, offend, and hurt the feelings of somebody, that is not hate speech. Bill C9 spells that out. So you can dislike, disdain is okay. You can discredit, humiliate, hurt, offend, mock, and ridicule somebody. That's not necessarily hate speech. However, if you cross this invisible line that's, you know, somewhere out in the sand, somewhere there's this line that if you cross over into vilification and detestation, that's not allowed. So it's almost comical trying to, they can't even define it because it is an emotion. But some really bad aspects of Bill 9 include the current hate speech laws. If somebody's going to be prosecuted for hate speech, there's a review by the Attorney General of the province. Okay. And that's usually not the case. Usually it's the local police, local Crown prosecutors, they decide, and they don't take everything up to the Attorney General of the province. Right. And rightfully so. There's law enforcement would come to a grinding halt. If you think about the thousands of criminal charges, you know, in a country of 40 million people. But there was an exception for the hate speech prosecutions. If somebody was going to be prosecuted, it had to be reviewed by the Attorney General. So there's a higher authority would look at this just to make sure that this wasn't just policemen's subjective feelings, whatever. That's going to be scrapped. So now the local police, local Crown prosecutors can prosecute whomever they want for hate speech without there being a review by higher authority. That's a big problem. The other thing that is deceptive about this is that the Canadian judges already have the power to impose a harsher sentence if a crime was motivated by hate. That's already on the books. But what they're doing now is that the whole sentencing structure can increase. So instead of a maximum 2 years, it becomes maximum 5 years. Instead of maximum 14 years, it becomes life in jail. So there's new authority for judges to increase a sentence dramatically because of the involvement of hate, which builds on an existing power that they already have.
Well, you know, my concern, and I brought up the William L. Shirer book, I suppose almost rhetorically, because I know there's a provision in the Act to exempt scholarly literature like historical literature, but I don't for a minute trust that, because I think the onus will eventually be on the person accused of hate to prove it's not being hateful. And I think that will gradually be eroded if not immediately. But you talk about the sentencing here, and here's the inevitable Sean Fraser talking about sentencing. And once again, he appears to be a minister not quite within his depth.
Is 5 years or more, but less than 10 years. 14 years if the maximum term of imprisonment is the included offense is 10 years or more, but less than 14 years. And life if the maximum term of imprisonment for the included offense is 14 years or more, and up to imprisonment for life. Okay, so sorry, what is there a question?
Can you tell us what they are?
Oh yeah, you want to know each of the different sentencing guidelines?
That'd be nice.
Yeah, sure. So let me flip open to the specific page. What's that? Oh, just on symbols. Yeah, so I think we're dealing with a two-year penalty. So, sorry, I'm looking at different things. Let me deal with the hate penalty first. So if you're found guilty of an indictable offense, a maximum penalty under the hate crime, it will be 5 years. If the maximum term of imprisonment for the included offense is 2 years or more, but less than 5 years. 10 years if the maximum term of imprisonment is included offense is 5 years or more, but less than 10 years. 14 years if the maximum term of imprisonment is the included offense is 10 years or more, but less than 14 years. And life if the maximum term of imprisonment for the included offense is 14 years or more, and up to imprisonment for life. Intimidation, where are we here? Would be, if you're guilty of an indictable offense, you'd be liable to imprisonment for a term of not more than 10 years. I've now skipped past the hate symbols piece. My apologies.
Astounding.
I want to jump in on the hate symbols thing. The hammer and sickle communist symbol is not, you can display that without risking jail time. So that kind of shows there's an ideology behind C9, because the communist hammer and sickle was the symbol, it was the banner under which communists in Russia and China and Vietnam and Cambodia and other countries have murdered tens of millions of people. If you were to look at it, you don't want to, comparisons always, get us into trouble. But I mean, the number of people murdered by communist regimes is astounding, and it's bigger than what happened in the 6 years of the Second World War. In any event, it's just kind of interesting that the swastika gets banned as a hate symbol, which is also problematic because there are Buddhist and Hindu Canadians who display a swastika on the outside of their house. I've seen them, swastikas on the outside of the houses, and they're not hateful. They have nothing to do with the Nazis in Germany in the 1930s. It's an ancient Sanskrit symbol for prosperity and good fortune. And so I hope the police are going to exercise discretion appropriately and not start arresting Buddhists and Hindus for displaying a swastika on the outside of their home, which they do in Canada and all over the world. It's an ancient religious symbol. So yeah, it's very ideologically. The other ideology you see in Bill C9 is that the minister says that he's introducing it because of the rising anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, transphobia, and homophobia rising. Okay, that's the pretext. He says nothing about the dozens of Christian churches that were burned to the ground, set ablaze by arson, utterly destroyed in Canada. We have well over 100. If you add in the burned to the ground, destroyed by arson, plus vandalized and desecrated, we have well over 100 churches in Canada that have been on the receiving end of arson and vandalism. And if even arson, which is obviously worse than just vandalism, dozens of churches burned to the ground. He just says nothing about that. Nothing. It's all about, it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, transphobia, and homophobia that these are, these are the problems. It says nothing about Christian churches being burned to the ground.
Well, that's an excellent point. And of course, as I pointed out, when the U.S. Pastor, evangelist, musician Sean Foyt was touring Canada, he was kicked out of so many public places. No freedom of religion for Christians, for evangelical Christians especially. It was actually, they threatened a Montreal church. They fined a Montreal church $10,000 for hosting him. Nothing about that from Mark Carney. And you're quite right. First of all, the swastika, yes, pre-existed the Nazis for thousands of years. But what really concerns me here is that we talk about Islamophobia, transphobia, homophobia, and yet these are things the government actively is subsidizing in terms of any sort of backlash. And we have a government that says, forget Pride season, every day of the year it should celebrate Pride. So I don't know where this homophobia is coming from. Certainly, I'm not seeing any evidence of it. Quite the reverse.
But it's
I
all,
see public subsidization of Pride festivals, Pride flags, Pride everything. So it's absolutely absurd.
And people are, if the law is properly enforced, and if it's not, that's a serious problem that needs to be addressed. But whether, regardless of your sexual feelings, sexual proclivities, assault is illegal in Canada. It's illegal to assault somebody. Any physical contact, even minor physical contact, is criminal. It's an assault. So the law just needs to be applied, and it needs to be applied equally, so everybody's protected by it. So assault is illegal. Uttering threats is illegal. If I were to say to you, David, I want you to do this or that, and if you don't do what I want, I'm going to burn your house down. Right then and there, that's a crime. So uttering threats is a crime. And if gay people or transgender people or whatever are assaulted, or if there's threats uttered against them, they deserve the same protection of the law as everybody else. So if we have a problem with unequal law enforcement, then that should be addressed. But we don't need additional laws when it's already illegal to assault somebody. It's already illegal to threaten somebody. It's already illegal to obstruct somebody. It's a criminal code offense to interfere with the lawful use and enjoyment of property. So if you're walking towards your car and I go stand between you and your car and prevent you from getting into your car, I could be criminally charged for that. That's a criminal offense. If people making their way into a house of worship, if you obstruct them or threaten them, it's already a crime. So you have lots of laws on the book. This is just a lot of virtue signaling where the government wants to be seen to be doing something when maybe, the solution, I don't know if depending on which province, maybe the police don't have enough resources to enforce existing laws. I don't know. I suppose that would vary from city to city and from province to province.
But this is all part and parcel of the same mentality that says we need hate crimes to begin with. Why does a democracy need hate crimes? Why does a country that supposedly admires and respects free speech need something called a hate crime or hate speech? Because freedom of speech means I can say something hateful. Freedom of speech means I can say something offensive. As you pointed out, hate and offense is in the eye and the ear of the beholder. But if we really have free speech, it's for speech that could be construed as hateful or offensive. That's what free speech is all about. This government doesn't get that. And we don't need more hate crimes legislation. It's embarrassing. It doesn't matter if you had some motivational reason for the murder you committed beyond you hated the person, whether it was based on gender, whether it was based on sexuality, whether it was based on ethnicity. Does it really matter? The crime is the killing, or the crime is the attack or the assault. Why can't we get back to some kind of common sense towards this instead of insisting the crime has to have something to do with your motivation based on race or sexuality or ethnicity? It's insanity to me. And we need to be moving away from these laws, not in reinforcing them.
Well, politicians never take away our rights and freedoms without offering a nice sounding pretext. And this is the government's, some politicians have been saying this. They've been talking about this for decades. And we got to protect you from hate. And of course, it sounds lovely, right? If you don't really think about it too much, you hear it. Oh yeah, we should all, we should just live in this happy world where there's no hate. So, makes sense. The government should protect us from hate. So we're going to outlaw hate speech. Superficially, it sounds great. The problem is who gets to decide what is hate, right? And it's going to be the politicians with, or bureaucrats. It doesn't even matter who it is, right? I don't think people would want to live in a country where I get to determine what's hateful and ban it. That really gives me control over everybody's speech, because then I could say, well, this is hateful and this is hateful and that's hateful. even scarier is when the government wants to protect us from disinformation and misinformation. There's an interesting clip I saw of John Kerry, the American Democrat politician who ran for president in 2004. He lost to George Bush, and he said the First Amendment, right, the free speech protection in the U.S. Constitution, stands in the way of government censoring disinformation. And he's entirely correct. Like, yes, it does, because he's kind of said the First Amendment, the free speech protection, is an obstacle because there are these people out there that are spreading disinformation. Not him, of course. He would never spread disinformation or misinformation. But there's these other bad people that are spreading disinformation that the government should be able to blow them out of the water, kind of shut them down. But the government can't do that because of the constitutional provision. I thought, yeah, well, you know what? He's entirely correct. It's rather sinister what he's saying, but it's the same problem that we face here, where the government will sell to, and there's some naive, gullible people that'll actually buy into this and go, "Oh yeah, government's going to protect me from misinformation and disinformation." I mean, no, that now government controls what you see and hear and read. And so that's really scary too. Watch out for that government protecting you from disinformation, misinformation.
Well, I think when all is said and done, if we get three pieces of legislation here aimed against free speech, aimed for censorship, Canada, I don't think will be much different from the United Kingdom, which right now is censorship capital of the democratic world. You're thrown in jail. For any reason, the government decides you're being spiteful, hateful, inciting anger, and it goes on. And the judges have just been deliriously happy about this. And they actually had to empty the prisons with rapists and murderers, let them out early so they could find room for all of these, as they call them, keyboard warriors, who are not necessarily in tune with the government narrative on things, especially mass migration, which the government's very touchy about in the UK. But of course, Keir Starmer had the gall to sit down with Donald Trump. And by the way, I aired that particular interview with John Kerry. I think it was at a symposium with the WEF, I think, if I recall. But when Keir Starmer was sitting down with Donald Trump, he had the gall to suggest there's no censorship in the UK. After all, this is the home of the Magna Carta. And we've had a long history of free speech. And I felt like saying, yeah, Keir, you ended that history about a year ago.
You ended the history. Yeah. You had a long history of free speech in the United Kingdom. Well, it's scary, and it seems that Canada is heading in that direction. Certainly the surveillance state. If you take Bill C-2 with the Authorized Access to Information Act, and government officials, not even just police officers, can compel electronic service providers to turn over information. And you've got the Bill C-8 with the power of the government to order a telecommunications provider, which again is just telecommunications. I was looking at it this morning, is defined in the Act. It's basically any non-paper communication, anything with wire, radio, internet. It's everything except for like a hard copy, paper and pen. That's what telecommunications is. So it includes the internet. And then as you put up on your screen a few minutes ago, that the government can order a telecommunications provider to cut off, to ban the internet provider from providing any service to any specified person. So, if Mark Carney doesn't like Dave Creighton or John Carpay or anybody else, they can order us kicked off the internet. That is really scary. Now, naive and gullible people who don't understand that government can be a force for evil as well as a force for good, they say, but the government would never do that because they're all really nice. Well, that's just ignorance of history. when governments have extraordinary powers, they use those extraordinary powers. You cannot, it's just utter foolishness and naivete to pass laws that give government huge, vast powers over the lives of citizens, and then trust that government will never abuse or misuse that power. That is so stupid. So the law has to be written in a way that it minimizes the power of government and keeps it within narrow channels to reach a worthwhile target. And all of these bills coming out now, they fall short of that standard.
Well, I've become increasingly libertarian in my outlook, and I'm an ex-military person. I worked on Parliament Hill. I was always very, very establishment in my outlook because I said, well, you know, the authorities are always going to be on my side, and the police will be on my side. The government, basically, whether it's liberal or conservative, they're going to be on my side as a God-fearing, law-abiding Canadian citizen. Then I realized during the Freedom Convoy that no, the government, the police were not on my side anymore. The military wasn't on my side anymore. And what was my side? Well, it was just sort of an average Canadian who pays his taxes, obeys the law, but just doesn't happen to agree with the Liberal Party narrative. And that makes me an enemy of the state. And so now the full force of government can be used against me, as it's being used right now, or could potentially be used against a ostrich farm in Edgewood, BC, simply because they're saying, go ahead, prove your point, test our ostriches, see if they are really sick. The government won't do that. They say, we don't have to do anything, except we don't follow the rule of law anymore. We make the rule of law case by case. We decide what's right and wrong, and you just have to abide by it. So what concerns me here, and I don't want to take too much more of your time. I could talk to you forever, John, but what concerns me is that there's going to be so much hate crime legislation on the books by the time the Carney government is expired, that there's not going to be any willingness on the part of a new conservative government, which I think we'll eventually get to someday, to repeal any of it. And we're going to be left with all of this grudge in our legal system, our judicial system, and we're never going to get rid of these hate laws. Because, and before you answer, I wanted to mention this. When Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, in the wake of the Charlie Kirk killing, suggested that maybe the United States should have hate speech legislation, there was a huge uproar from Charlie Kirk's most ardent supporters, the MAGA people, the Republican Party supporters. They said, forget it. We don't want to be like Canada. We don't want hate speech crime in this country. Freedom of speech means you have the freedom to say hateful, offensive things. That's what the First Amendment's all about. I don't know if we have that in Canada. You know, free speech is very vaguely defined in our Charter of Rights. We don't even have property rights in our Constitution. But do you think there's going to be sufficient pushback to say, let's get rid of this nonsense and let's really have free speech in Canada?
It's really up to Canadians, and certainly our protections here are not as robust. We've got some pretty muddled. We've got some good Supreme Court of Canada decisions, but they're not overly strong. We had the Quebec comedian who mocked and ridiculed a handicapped boy, which I think is reprehensible speech, but it shouldn't be illegal. He won his case, but that was narrow. That was 5-4. We've got a very mushy decision of the Supreme Court of Canada in the Whatcott case, where it's very mealy-mouthed and it's very vague. This is where they get into these weird, trying to define hatred, and it's so you can discredit and humiliate and ridicule and offend people. You can hurt their feelings, you can dislike them, there can be disdain, and that's all okay. That's not hate speech, but don't cross this mysterious line into detestation and vilification. So you get these fairly muddled rulings. The Keekstra ruling of the Supreme Court of Canada, this is decades ago, very narrowly upheld hate speech. Beverly McLaughlin and 2 other justices, I seem to recall, was a 4-3 decision. You had this very strong dissent that would have actually gotten rid of the restrictions on free speech of the criminal code section 319, the criminal hate speech provisions. They were almost struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada, but there's a narrow 4-3 majority. They were upheld. A good ruling is of the Supreme Court was striking down a provision that it was a criminal code offense to spread false news, which is hugely problematic. Who gets to decide what is false or not? And the Supreme Court actually struck down that. It used to be a criminal code offense in Canada. Spreading false news was criminal, and so that was struck down. So the Supreme Court rulings on free speech in Canada they're a dog's breakfast, and they're not nearly as strong as the American Supreme Court rulings in favor of free speech.
Well, that striking down the false news provision, was that during the Jim Keekstra trial, or was that during the Ernst Zundel trial? Because I know he was charged. That was
Zundel. Zundel defended himself. He was charged because he was a Holocaust denier. He was charged with spreading false news, and his defense was that the law itself was an unjustified violation of freedom of expression, and he won. And the court struck it down, and I agree with the majority of the court. It's an older provision that was actually, the original purpose of it was to protect the great men of the realm. That was the purpose, was to, because if somebody was bad-mouthing the king or the nobles, and that was obviously false if you said something bad about the king and the nobles, so spreading false news, that was the origins of it. And but practically speaking, right, you get into this who is to decide what is false or not? In a free country, you and I and everybody else as adults, we get to make up our own minds about what's true and false. We don't have the government stepping in on our behalf and determining what's true and false.
And in conclusion, I just want to play this clip from the public safety minister, who of course is the man in charge of Bill C-8, which another piece of censorship legislation, which you described in detail. But listen to his response to this Conservative MP question.
This is the mandate I was given by the Prime Minister to complete this and not revisit this. It sounds like he doesn't even believe in this. So if the Public Safety Minister doesn't believe in this program, why are we spending $742 million taxpayer dollars to keep it going?
Here, here. Great. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I've addressed this issue a number of times, but let me just make it very personal, Mr. Speaker. The last 4 months in this role as Minister of Public Safety, I've received a great deal of vitriol from the gun lobby, Mr. Speaker. If you go into my social media accounts, you will see hundreds, if not thousands, of comments of hatred that's coming through the gun lobby, Mr. Speaker. What the party opposite is doing is reinforcing that. We have a serious plan to ensure that guns are off our streets.
So, and I won't go into it. He goes on about his gun plan, which he doesn't even believe in, but immediately he appeals to the hate speech. And do you believe for a minute that, I think he said thousands of people sent hate speech missives to him?
It's a disgusting trend. You see this all the time. You criticize somebody, and it's called harassment. So somebody comes out and says, David, your opinions are wrong on these issues and for these reasons, and then it's like, oh well, that's harassment, is to disagree with somebody, and it's really sad, because if you call hateful anytime somebody says something that you disagree with, and you start calling it hate, it diminishes the meaning and the value of the word. It's like racism, right? If everything is racist, then nothing is racist. So if you just very quickly, easily do these cheap shots and run around calling everything racist that you disagree with, it takes away the power of the word to be useful and beneficial in the right circumstances. So yeah, unfortunate that the minister regards criticism as hateful.
And of course, this is the minister in charge of LCA. So I'm not assured in any way that we're going to get any due process here. But John Carpay, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, you and your organization do so much to help those who couldn't help themselves otherwise, and when they're attacked by government overreach. I applaud your group every day as much as I can. I've supported your group for many, many years. I'll continue to do so because you do an invaluable service, not just to Canadians who need your assistance, but to Canadian freedom, and especially freedom of speech, which I think basically is foundational to our democracy, probably the most important freedom we have. And we lose that, I think we lose our democracy. And I want to thank you for the hard work you do, the people you represent. I don't think there's ever been a cause you've represented I didn't believe in wholeheartedly. So I really want to thank you for the work you do. And thank you for spending as much time as you did with me this morning. And God bless you and your work.
Well, thanks for having me on your show. Thanks for the kind words about the Justice Center. And have a great rest of the day, David.
Okay. Thank you, John. Bye for now. And that, of course, is John Carpay, whom I interviewed yesterday. And I could talk to John forever. And I'm so glad some of you, anyway, from my audience were enjoying this today. And we're not done yet. I've got breaking news about the ostrich farm, Universal Ostrich Farms in Edgewood, BC. And I haven't got word from Katie yet this morning, but I've certainly sent her a couple of messages to say we're gonna keep fighting this because this is outrageous. Before I get to the breaking news on this was a moment of splendor for me. I was on Redacted yesterday to talk about not only the latest on the ostrich farm, but about Mark Carney's fondness for digital ID and Mark Carney's fondness for censorship bill. 3 censorship bills coming up. 2 of them have already had first reading. We've got a third one coming up. Does this have something to do with the globalist attitude of Mark Carney? Is it because he's trying to catch up because Justin Trudeau failed to pass the Online Harms Act? But believe me, we've got C8, C9, and a yet-to-be-numbered bill that's going to replace the Online Harms Act. This is coming up, folks. Sean Fraser, I'm not going to show that again. Sean Fraser promised there's going to be another bill. So anyway, we talked about this on Redacted yesterday, and I mentioned one of the last things I talked about was the fact that Bill C9 makes it a criminal offense to display a hateful symbol. So Clayton said, here's my symbol to the government of Canada, to the Carney government. And I thought, oh, God bless you for that, Clayton. That was a wonderful moment. So watch yesterday's Redacted. I'm putting it out separately, but if you can't wait for that, watch Clayton and Natalie as they interviewed me yesterday. And it was, you can see, I don't think I've seen myself look so exuberantly happy in a photograph that I do here. So this is wonderful. And I want to get to the story here. This was broadcast last night on CTV News. RCMP investigates alleged assault of woman who lives beside BC Ostrich Farm. She lives beside the BC Ostrich Farm. I'm not going to get into the details, but this woman says she was attacked, and some guy in a balaclava came to her door and poured gasoline on her, and she had to bite his arm and kick him in the private parts to make him go away. Now, I don't know if the story's true. That's up to the police. The RCMP are investigating. They've arrested a suspect. I was not there. I have no idea. I know this is a distraction, though. The media that they bought off and paid for, national media, are behind this story suddenly breaking yesterday, as we're on the verge of the Supreme Court making a decision about whether or not they're going to hear the case of Universal Ostrich Farms and that farm's insistence that these are 399 healthy ostriches that should not be killed by the Canadian government. Now, a lot of you out there might be saying, It seems like I've heard this before. I've heard this before. Where have you heard this before? Oh, the Freedom Convoy. Remember, there were all those stories about what? There were all those stories about, oh, somebody was dancing on the tomb of the unknown soldier. Yeah, that's terrible. As a former military member, as a veteran, yeah, that's a terrible thing to do. That's a sacred relic of Canada. Oh, and somebody was desecrating the statue of Terry Fox. As somebody from British Columbia who adored Terry Fox in the work he did and who mourned his passing. That was a terrible thing. And somebody lit fire to an apartment building. And you know what? All of those crimes or all of those offenses were attributed to Freedom Convoy supporters. All of them. And as it turned out, none of them were committed by Freedom Convoy supporters. Not one. In fact, the arson case, it looks like a anti-Freedom Convoy person lit that fire. So what am I saying? Well, this is very suspicious to begin with. The story would suddenly appear, and Katie Passatney would suddenly be asked to comment about this. First of all, this has nothing to do with whether or not there's any scientific basis or any morality behind the Canadian Food Inspection Agency carrying out an execution of 399 healthy birds. It is completely irrelevant. Secondly, some guy dressed up in a balaclava mask sounds a lot to me like Antifa. Whether or not he was infiltrating the supporters of the Universal Ostrich Farm or not, I don't know, but it sounds like he was. And this is done to discredit the farm and the whole principle of why these ostriches should live. Test them, CFIA. Don't put out stories. Don't tell your media to suddenly focus on this story, which has nothing at all to do with whether the CFI decision is right or wrong. If this lady was assaulted, that's a horrible thing. And the person who did that should be charged for a crime. If that person is a supporter, then fine. If that person's not a supporter, which is more likely, he should be charged. But why, I ask you this, people, dear viewers, why would anybody supporting Katie and the farm do something like this? It doesn't make any sense. And clearly, anybody who would do this is trying to discredit what the farm is saying and distract you from the fact that CFIA is a cowardly organization of criminal. The organization is criminal and terrorist. I'll put it that way. And this organization is nothing but an execution squad. They cannot defend themselves except putting out stories about how other people around the farm are complaining. Because they don't have a leg to stand on. They don't have an ostrich leg to stand on. They have nothing going in their favor because they reject science and they continue to refuse to test these birds because they know they're wrong. And they clown around with their hazmat suits on, looking like they have some kind of authority. And they're nothing but a bunch of clowns. Let's watch a bit more recent video.
Trucks are still making their way around. Ostriches are getting excited. They've been trying to lure them over into the far pen right by the hay bales, right? So they can eventually get them in there. See? So we were parked here on the side of the road, and they made us move like another 3 feet, right? Because the truck wasn't going to make it. See, there's the truck tracks, but I think the trucker was being a drama queen. From Alberta, eh? The white one there, that one's from Alberta. Not sure if the black one was, but you could see the number of the truck. I think it was 585 or something.
Okay, there's so many bales of hay being used to create this execution pen that nearby farmers can't get the hay they need. This is how ludicrous the situation has become. But the federal government is intent upon killing these birds because they don't want the truth to come out. That these birds exhibit herd immunity. Maybe we don't need a vaccine for everything. Maybe sometimes we can recover. Maybe Big Pharma doesn't want people to know that. Maybe Mark Carney, who's in bed with Big Pharma, doesn't want people to know that either. Let's have a look at this one here.
No suits on.
You see that, guys, yeah?
No suits. And yesterday when we were here, so less than 24 hours, because more hay bales showed up yesterday around 6:30. The hole is completely done, and look, now they're stacked 4 high.
Oh, they went another one on top.
Yeah, so yesterday was 3, so now they're 4 high. The hole is filled in.
I know.
Yeah, they are continuing to prepare for the execution. And this is what's been happening ever since the Supreme Court, well, ever since they invaded the farm 10 days ago now. It was a week on Monday. But ever since they invaded and occupied the farm, they have continued to prepare for the execution. Even though the Supreme Court said, let's have a stay of execution, they prepared like they know what the outcome is going to be. So this is very troublesome, very problematic. And we need to be vigilant. And I know I'm going over the hour this morning, but I'm doing this because we've got so many issues to deal with at the same time. We're losing our free speech. We've got digital ID coming. We're losing our last guns. Canadian farmers are losing their guns. That's what the latest Carney gun grab is aimed at. And a Canadian farm in British Columbia is losing their right to property, livestock, livelihood, everything. And if you think if that's not going to affect every Canadian farmer and every Canadian citizen eventually, think again. Now, I want to play this because there are so many people who have come to the fore for Katie and her family and the family farm. And here's a veterinarian talking about that.
The ethics of this, all these healthy, now surviving, 400 ostriches, they're eating, they're drinking, they've obviously developed some type of natural immunity because they're not clinically sick. They're not showing any signs of the flu. They're 100% normal. So they went through the court process. They asked for leniency. They kind of moved up different levels of the courts. In all cases, even when they've gone and had an appeal, things have eventually been denied. So now we're at the point where they've exhausted all the court processes. They've exhausted all their appeals. And, the CFIA inspectors and those who are going to do the mass call were on the farm as of yesterday. The CFIA, they say it's about stopping the virus before it spreads. Their worry is the virus can mutate, become even more pathogenic, cause much more disease. And yes, in some cases, it can jump to people. And yes, that's happened. So their solution, just kill them all, wipe it out. We're going to stamp out this disease. But it's now in the wild bird population, right? We're not going to gather the hundreds of millions of Canada geese and wipe them all out. They're around the world. It's endemic in the wild bird population. So how is it that, we can wipe out all these big, healthy birds on a farm and somehow think we're going to control that disease? That is not realistic. There's activists There are literally thousands of people across North America to make high-profile figures. RFK, the U.S. Health Secretary, has spoken about this. Dr. Oz has spoken about this. There are thousands and thousands of people really opposed to what's happening. One of their arguments is, let's look at these birds from the point of view from science. I mean, how did they develop this immunity? Like, could we not study these surviving birds and learn something about how birds can then develop immunity to avian flu? Like, how did they fight that off? Destroy the birds, you destroy the science. And then the obvious argument about seeing this avian flu being endemic in the wild bird population, like, just doesn't make any sense. Like, you're not going to control that disease by just wiping out these individual farm herds when it's like endemic. It's all in this wild bird population. And these ostriches, they're in a very isolated part of the world, this teeny little community, right, tucked into the mountains. Right? Just doesn't make sense. What about the ethics of this? It obviously isn't just about science. I mean, first of all, like, killing 400 healthy animals? From a veterinarian point of view, I understand the need, like when you've got serious infectious disease. We don't want other people being exposed to serious infectious disease. We don't expose other animals to it. But it doesn't mean that we take like a healthy animal that's recovered from an illness, we just kill them. Like, they didn't really teach us that in vet school. She was quoted as saying she didn't see how they can kill this many large animals humanely. As she rightfully said, cruelty to animals, it violates the Criminal Code of Canada. Specifically, the Act says that an animal owner cannot cause unnecessary injury, pain, or suffering to any animal. She said it's not possible to kill via shooting all these large and heavy birds without causing this big mass panic. They don't have an easy enclosed space. You can't just round them all up and slit their throats. Because the point of euthanasia is doing it humanely in terms of where we're not causing any ill or distress to these animals. And I don't know. You're not going to humanely euthanize 400 big ostriches. A bunch of alternatives were proposed. None of those are accepted. Couldn't the ostriches just been quarantined where they are? It's a very isolated spot. Repeatedly tested for the avian flu. And could they not have just called, essentially euthanized just those that tested positive? And now you've got this herd of 400 animals, which look 100% healthy. You know, you get a population exposed to a disease. They develop the ability to fight off that disease, develop antibodies in response to the virus. They're looking pretty darn healthy now. Yet the CFIA says like there can be no exceptions. Like if you make one exception, then what do you know? Everybody's going to want us to not kill their birds if they test positive for avian flu. Like, okay, is that really a bad thing? Why can there not be some type of flexibility? Why does it have to be so like black or white or rigid? Like, isn't that what we're trying to get to, period? Isn't that some of our problems right now as a society? It's all kind of black or white. It's got to be this or else. Like, okay, there's probably some middle ground we could reach. And applying some common sense, and if we applied it in this case, probably these 400 animals wouldn't be dying. Really what we're trying to do is balance science, risk, compassion. You know, obviously that's not happening. They're just saying like, risk science, it's here. Too bad. All your birds are going to die. Whether it's humanely or not, who knows? Do these animals really have to die? Or could there have been another way? In my opinion, yeah, there really could have been and should have been and should be.
There's a really objective source who doesn't have a political axe to grind, unlike the experts that the CBC likes to use who have political axes to grind in every case. So I invite you to watch that whole episode at Veterinary Secrets. And he has got a huge following. I invite you to watch that. Thank you so much for watching us today. This has been a pleasure. We'll have more about the ostrich situation. We could have a Supreme Court ruling on this within the next day or two. We'll be watching. I'm in contact with Katie at the farm throughout the day, and we will go live if we have to at a moment's notice, if anything happens. And I encourage you to hope and pray. Pray for this farm, for people who are just like you, for ordinary Canadians who are simply fighting for their right to exist, who are fighting for their private property, who are fighting for their livestock, who are fighting for their livelihoods. And remember that. Remember them in your prayers. Thanks for watching today. Be back again tomorrow. God bless all of you. Godspeed. And if there's a country left to celebrate, let's keep fighting and resolve.